Hi, welcome to Fern the Lamb, where I mostly talk about my knitting. My name is Marian, and thank you so much for being here. In this episode, I am covering the projects that I have worked on in the months of May and June. I have 2 finished objects, 1.5 whips. I have an acquisition, and I also have a couple sewing FOs in the end as well. So let's start with my finished objects. My first one is a sweater that I'm wearing. This is my return to the Shire. The pattern is actually sweater number 30 V-neck by My Favorite Things. This is my dream knit that I made in anticipation for my move to New Zealand, which is upcoming in a couple weeks. I knit this mostly with New Zealand sourced yarn, which is just really special to me. It's a worsted weight pattern, so I use 2 fingering weight yarns as well as a lace weight mohair. And that's mostly due because I bought a sweater's quantity of fingering weight yarn last year, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. So as it sat in my stash and as inspiration kind of came around, it evolved into this garment. I have no qualms with this pattern. I think it was written really well. The only struggles that I had was maintaining my gauge and my tension because I am just like a loose knitter in general, and my purl stitches are very loose compared to my knit stitches. So there's a 2mm difference between my purls and my knit stitches, I've learned. So what I did differently in this sweater was that I knit the body 2 inches longer. I also changed the rate of decreases in the sleeves after the 9th round. And so in my previous episode, I said that I changed my decrease after the 11th. I misspoke. It was my 9th. And so it's every 3 rows that I decrease instead of what the pattern suggested. That's just to accommodate the length, and I think it turned out really well. My intention with this sweater is to kind of wear it as an outerwear piece. It's the thickest, wooliest sweater that I have in my wardrobe, so I think I succeeded in that goal. For a neat ribbing, I did a German short row turn because you will not catch me doing twisted rib anymore. And that means that when I'm doing the V-neck, I am doing center decreases on the purl side instead of the knit side. My final garment measurements fall between an extra small and a small, and my gauge difference is just a half a stitch different than Louise's gauge. I also spoke at length about this project, mostly with the yarns, how my inspiration kind of came around, and the needle sizes that I used. So if you're interested in learning more about this sweater and my experience with it, feel free to check out my previous podcast episode. So my next finished object is my Honeycomb and Moss sock. This is a pattern by Summer Lee in her book, The Sock Project. It is actually the last project in the book. I knit a size medium with Hobbii Fern sock wool in the shade Gold Dust using 2.25mm needles in 9-inch circulars. So I don't really plan on knitting another sock. I don't have enough yarn, which is kind of what I expected anyways. And my husband actually had this idea of framing it kind of inspired by Wes Anderson because of this yellow color. And so that will be the plan with this sock, is that it will live in a shadow box to commemorate my very first fully knit sock. Because every sock that I made prior to this was knit on my CSM. So because this is also my first sock, I had many issues knitting this, and it's all personal mistakes. Number 1 was the heel flap. I just didn't read my pattern correctly. I thought that on the wrong side rows, I'm supposed to be slipping and purling until the end of the row, when in fact you're only supposed to slip the first stitch and purl the rest of the row. And so that is something that I learned on Reddit after I posted my heel flap asking for help, and everyone just came through. It was really funny too, because there were a couple people that were knitting their heel flaps like I was and didn't realize that they were actually doing anything wrong. So with that said, I don't think there is really anything wrong in knitting a heel flap like that. In fact, it makes a more robust heel because you are slipping more stitches, and it also results in a more stockinette-like heel flap. And so if you're not a fan of this rib-like texture, maybe you can try slip purl on your wrong side rows. My takeaways from this sock as my first sock is number 1, 9-inch circulars are okay, but I find them still too big for this circumference. Number 2, 2.25 millimeter needles are a little too small for me. I would rather use a 2.5 or a 2.75 for a more comfortable experience. 3, I should be knitting my heel flap at least 2.5 inches to accommodate my high arch and instep. And 4, after many frustrations and after reading Kate Atherley's custom socks, I learned that when knitting cable socks, you're supposed to be knitting with 0 ease, because the more cables that you are doing in your sock, the tighter the fabric gets. And so it's best to either go up a needle size or go up a size in general. In the book, she does mention a calculation of knowing exactly what size you're supposed to be knitting, so you can also follow that if you have the book as well. Now, in terms of the pattern, there is a mistake. And so if you do have the book and you're planning on knitting this, just ignore the pattern setup section and instead follow the pattern motif section instead. The mistake is that it's off by a full size. And so if you're knitting the setup row that she recommends and then you follow through, you'll notice that your motif is going to be staggered. And I can kind of understand where this comes from, because in the book, not all of the socks offer all of the sizes. And so, for example, in the basic socks, she shares toddler sizes, kid sizes, and adult sizes. In some patterns, it's just adult sizes. And then in some patterns, there's kids and adult. And so I can kind of see where that confusion can kind of come around in the editing. So my next project is a great transition because it is both an FO, but also a whip. And this is the Cozy Cabled Socks, also by Summer Lee in the book The Sock Project. This is a DK weight sock pattern, and so I used a 3.25 millimeter needle with Knit Pick Stroll in the shade Rabbit Heather and a Kid Silk Mohair by Hobbii in the shade Americano. This is stash yarn, so you are going to see a lot of overlap in the yarns that I use, and it's the same mohair that I used in this sweater. I am so in love with the color that kind of came around with this. It reminds me of a building in Los Alamos called the 1880 Union Hotel, and it was a coincidence because I was knitting this sock as I was there on vacation. I was in the Solvang area having a sideways wine country kind of tour experience situation, which was really cool. And by the way, if you have not heard of the movie Sideways, I highly recommend it, especially if you like wine and live in California. So learning from my previous sock experience, I knit this in a size large and it fits me perfectly. And so I highly recommend that. I also read from other Ravelry users that they also went up a size because it was tight on their leg. And so that really comes around with what Kate Atherley mentions in her book about cables making socks tighter. The modifications that I made in this sock was that I added 10 rows of 3x1 ribbing, and I continued the cable motif all the way to the foot instead of the striped feature that Summer has in her sample. Since the cable is not symmetrical for a panel, I am planning to knit my other sock starting with a knit stitch instead of the purl stitch. Now, in terms of the pattern, there is unfortunately a mistake as well. And so if you are planning to knit this, keep in mind that in your even rows, you should be knitting your slip stitches and not slipping them. The other mistake that I have caught in this book, it's not so much of a mistake, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, is that for all of the DK weight sock patterns in the book, Summer recommends a stitch count to pick up on the heel flap. And for instance, this is a size large, which is a 56 stitch sock. She recommends to pick up 8 stitches on each side of the heel flap for a total of 60 stitches for the foot on the needle before you decrease. And so that means that you only need to do 2 rounds of decreasing to get back to 56, which does not make any sense because it would make a very shallow gusset. So for me, I picked up every single stitch, which is about 15 stitches. But of course, this is kind of relative to your foot shape and everything. So I really enjoyed knitting this sock, and you'll definitely see more DK weight socks in the future. I actually am planning to knit every single cabled sock pattern in this chapter of the book. In the book, she has a cabled sock chapter, and it has 4 patterns in it. So I plan to knit the Seafarer and the Harriet socks relatively soon. So moving on to my whips, and I'm only going to briefly talk about this because it's the exact same situation that I have in my previous podcast. This is the Emotional Support Chicken. This is the tail so far. This is knit with all Hobbii yarn, so it's Winter Glow held double and Fern sock wool held triple for the beak and the comb. Reason why I'm knitting another chicken is because I purchased this yarn specifically for the chicken, and I have almost exactly half of everything left. So I have a lot of eyes left, a lot of the sock wool left, a lot of the Winter Glow, and half a bag of stuffing. So it just makes sense, especially because I am destashing at the moment. So despite destashing, I did acquire a hank of yarn, and this is Cascade Heritage, which is their sock base in the shade Burgundy. It is a coincidence that I picked up a burgundy shade during my wine country trip, and I bought this at the knit shop in Santa Barbara, which is a really cute store. If you're in the area, check it out. It's so cute, and the owner is very nice. And as I kind of mentioned, I plan to knit either the Seafarer or the Harriet socks with this yarn, and I'm going to hold it double for a DK weight sock. I am now moving on to my sewing FOs. That is all for my knitting, but don't worry, this is not going to be a sewing channel. I no longer own a sewing machine because I sold it in preparation for my move. And before I sold it, I quickly churned out a couple of projects. So I thought I'd just share it because it is somewhat knitting related. The first one is just a very simple drawstring bag. And I followed a free tutorial here on YouTube that I will link in the description. The fabric that I used is actually a print that I designed, and I got it printed at Spoonflower. So this print I designed while I was grieving my Flame Point Berman mix cat who passed away a couple years ago. And without getting too much into it, this kind of symbolizes her various stages of bloom. Her name was Lily, by the way, Lilith. And it has a locket and a key just to symbolize that she has the key to my heart. The lining is billy balls that I drew with ink and nib, and I chose billy balls because when billy balls dry and are no longer fresh, they still retain their vibrant yellow color, and so even though Lily is no longer with me, she still lights up my heart. This is the ribbon that I used. It is by Terrain, which is an Anthropology sister brand, and it's a velvet frayed ribbon, hand dyed, It's very nice. It does shed a lot though, and it is a natural fiber. I did try to burn the edges and it didn't work. So if you're interested, that is the ribbon that I use for my drawstring bag. My other sewing FO is this mini pouch. I also designed this fabric. It's called Garden Wings, and you can also get this at my Spoonflower shop if you're interested. This is a very simple pattern as well, and I also followed a free YouTube tutorial, so I will link that in the description. And this guy just fits my mic in it. I got this new mic recently to improve my audio quality, and the bag that it comes with does not even fit my mic in it, so makes sense to sew a little pouch for it. So a bit of a shameless plug, I am an artist and I do design prints, and so if you are a seamstress, you like to sew, and you need anything in particular, just let me know and I'd love to work with you. We can make something very fun together. Now, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. My next episode will be me in New Zealand, and so that will be very interesting. I don't know what that's gonna look like. We're kind of bouncing around in our first month of living in New Zealand. We won't have a home yet, so you'll see me around. I'll be in the Auckland area the first week, so I think I'm going to be in Auckland from the 8th of July all the way to maybe the 16th. So if you want to meet up, let me know. I'd love to see you guys. Until then, happy knitting, and I'll see you soon.